Last night, my son called. His voice was cold. He said he was getting married in the morning, and that my house and the 9 million his father left me had already been signed over to him. He ended with one word: bye. I sat in the dark, holding the phone, feeling like my whole life had been sold off in silence. But what he didn't know was that he forgot one small detail, and that mistake would change everything. It was nearly midnight when the phone rang. I was standing in the kitchen folding a dish towel when I heard it buzz on the counter. I didn't rush. Calls that late were never good news, and I already had that heaviness in my chest, the kind that grows slowly over months and finally finds a way to speak. It was Brendan. His voice was flat. No greeting, no pause. "I'm getting married tomorrow," he said. "Your car and house are signed over. I took care of everything. Don't make this harder than it has to be." There was silence after that, not even a click, just nothing. I stared at the dark screen, then at the windows. The glass shimmered from the rain outside, the kind of soft Pennsylvania drizzle that doesn't let up, just lingers and soaks you by accident. I sat down at the kitchen table without realizing. My knees buckled a bit. That old chair under me creaked the way Harold's did when he used to lean back and rub his temples after dinner. I didn't cry. Not yet. Something inside me went still instead, like a fog rolling in over the mind, wrapping everything in a blanket too heavy to lift. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. That same hum had been in this kitchen for over 30 years. Harold installed it himself, refusing to pay for delivery. I remembered watching him back the pickup truck into the driveway, proud and laughing. This was our house. Every wooden beam, every coat of paint, every garden bed, Harold's hands were in them. My hands, too. And Brendan, back when he was still small and called me Mama, helped press the stepping stones along the front path. Now he called me once in the dark to say goodbye, as if I were a burden he could shake off before saying I do. I sat at that table for hours, I think, just tracing my fingers along the wood grain, like if I followed the line long enough, I'd find some part of myself I had lost along the way. He said the house was signed over, that he had taken care of it. I couldn't remember signing anything that would let him do that. But the truth was, these past few months I had let him bring me papers. Little things, he said. "Routine stuff, Mum. Dad's accounts, some refinancing, blah blah." And I had signed. Not all at once, but here and there. Because when your son brings you papers with a half hug and a smile that reminds you of when he was 12 and built a fort in the living room you trust, you want to believe he's still that boy. But now I was realizing something darker, something colder. Brendan hadn't just gotten greedy. He had planned this. And the worst part wasn't even the money. It was the fact that he didn't even want me at the wedding. He didn't say I couldn't come. He just didn't say I should. He made no room for me. Not in his new life. Not in that call. Not even in the past tense. I kept hearing the click of the rain against the windows. I think I counted them like a metronome for the ache inside. Tell me if you're still listening. Has your own blood ever turned your trust into a weapon? I didn't sleep that night. I just sat with the silence, holding it like a cracked vase I couldn't put down. Tomorrow he would walk down an aisle, and I would start gathering the pieces. By morning the rain had stopped, but the heaviness in my chest hadn't lifted. I brewed coffee the same way Harold used to like it. 2 scoops, slow pour, no sugar. I drank it black now. There was something honest about the bitterness. The wedding was probably beginning somewhere. A hall rented, chairs in rows, Brendan in a navy suit maybe. He always hated tuxedos. His bride, whose name I could never quite remember, would be smiling in white. I sat at the kitchen window and stared out at the dogwood tree Harold planted the year Brendan was born. It used to bloom brighter. These days it looked tired, like it needed pruning. Or maybe it missed the sound of Harold's saw the way I missed his voice reading the morning paper. Around 10, Evelyn showed up with a basket of cinnamon bread. She didn't knock anymore, just opened the door like we were sisters. I tried to smile, but something in me cracked. She sat the basket down without saying a word and watched me from the other side of the table. Her eyes scanned my face like she was searching for a bruise that didn't show. Then she asked, careful and soft, if I had heard from Brendan lately. I nodded once. She leaned in a little. Not nosy, just concerned. I said, he called, told me he was getting married, told me the house and car weren't mine anymore, told me nothing else. Evelyn blinked slowly. Then she sat back, as if her spine suddenly forgot how to hold her up. We sat there for a long moment, quiet. Only the clock on the wall dared speak. Then she asked if it had anything to do with those visits he made all spring, the coffee runs, the folders he brought over when I had the flu, the way he smiled too wide when I signed the papers he called routine. I told her I didn't remember anything suspicious, just pages, long typed pages. I didn't read them. I trusted him. She didn't say I was foolish. She just reached out, placed a warm hand over mine and said, Brendan's been acting off lately, coming by here often, always glancing at the windows. I thought it was sweet, but now I wonder. Her words settled like cold water on my skin. I got up and walked straight to the side cabinet in the hallway. That was where Harold and I kept our important documents. A red folder, thick and neat, with everything from the deed to our marriage license. I opened it. It was empty. Instead, tucked inside was a single folded note. It was Brendan's handwriting. It said, Mom, don't worry about the paperwork anymore. I've taken care of it all. Rest easy. Rest easy. I held that note like it might burn through my fingers. Then I felt something I hadn't let myself feel last night. Panic. Not the kind that screams, the kind that tightens around your lungs and whispers that you've been erased bit by bit and didn't even notice. I walked back to the kitchen and told Evelyn I needed to go to the bank. She offered to drive, and I didn't argue. At the bank, I gave them my name, my old account number, my ID. The teller clicked around, then frowned. She asked if I had recently changed any legal authorizations. I said no. She stepped away and brought back a manager. He explained gently that the account had been transferred under a new joint authority. My name was listed as inactive. Access had been moved. I asked if Brendan had anything to do with it. He said he couldn't share specifics, but the signature matched. I didn't cry in the bank. I waited until we got home and Evelyn handed me a tissue, even though I hadn't made a sound. She sat with me in the living room, not talking, just there. I stared at the framed photo of Harold on the bookshelf, the one where he's holding a hammer in one hand and a baby Brendan in the other. I remember the way he always said, never sign anything without reading it first, but he never imagined I'd need protection from our own child. That night I didn't sleep again. I lay in bed and watched the ceiling as if it might offer answers. What had I missed? What had I given away in the name of love? Whatever Brendan had done, it wasn't a mistake. It was a plan, and I had helped him carry it out with my own pen. The next morning, I woke early, not from sleep because there hadn't been any. My body felt like it had been scraped clean from the inside, and all that was left was a dull, hollow pressure in my chest. I went straight to the cabinet again. I opened the red folder as if something might have magically returned. Still empty. Then I remembered Harold's old fireproof box. It used to be tucked under the guest bed behind the sewing machine I never used. I got on my knees, pulled it out. The key was still taped underneath. Inside, nothing but old tax returns and a few warranty slips. No deed, no power of attorney forms, no medical directive. All the important documents we once held in duplicate were now simply gone. My hands trembled. I checked my desk drawer, the safe in the closet. Every box marked important. I even climbed into the attic. But there was nothing. Not one page of the life we had carefully built for decades remained in my possession. Instead, there was a feeling crawling under my skin, a prickling, growing sense that this wasn't just betrayal. It was erasure. I went to the kitchen to call the bank again. This time I asked if they could print a record of recent authorizations. The woman on the line said those types of requests required formal written consent from the current account holder. When I gave my name, she paused, then said in a careful tone that I was not listed as a current holder, that Brendan Lindell had full legal control as of 3 weeks ago. That was the same week he brought over soup, told me to rest, handed me a folder marked insurance updates. I remember signing a few pages. He smiled, said he would handle it from there. He had been handling everything, just not for me. I hung up, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the wall. I felt like I was watching myself from a distance, like I had drifted away from my body and was hovering in the corner of the room, powerless, useless, old. The front door creaked. Evelyn walked in. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at me, really looked. Then she said, soft as breath, "I brought your tea. You didn't come out today." I nodded. My voice didn't work. I gestured toward the table. She sat. I told her what I had found: the missing documents, the call to the bank, Brendan's name on everything, my name no longer tied to the house I had lived in for 42 years. Her face went still. She asked when the last time was I had actually seen a document with my name on it. I couldn't remember. We sat in silence. Then she stood up, walked to the living room shelf and pulled down an old photo album. She flipped to a picture of Brendan as a teenager standing next to Harold in front of the garage. She looked back at me. I said, "It's like that boy in the picture died. The one who used to bring me daisies from the yard. The one who cried when I cut his sandwich wrong. I don't know who this man is." She didn't try to disagree. That night I couldn't sleep again. So I wandered the house in the dark, my fingers grazing the walls. Harold built the mantel he carved by hand. Every piece of this house was filled with his work, his sweat, his pride. And now it was in Brendan's name, all of it. And I had handed it over without reading a word. Sometime after midnight, I opened the drawer in Harold's desk. That's when I saw the envelope, not red, not labelled, just plain white, tucked beneath a stack of old utility bills. It was sealed. I opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note in Harold's tight, neat script. "If anything happens, if you feel lost, call Dennis Fairgrove. He knows the structure. Trust him." I read the note twice. Dennis. It had been years since I heard that name. Dennis had worked with Harold when they were younger. Something with pensions, insurance, maybe more. I only met him a few times, always polite, always sharp. I found an old church directory and flipped through the pages. There it was. Dennis Fairgrove. Still listed. Still local. Still had a number. I called before I could second-guess myself. He answered on the second ring. His voice sounded older but calm. I said my name. There was a pause. Then he said, "Marjorie, from Harold's crew." I remember. "Is everything all right?" I told him not over the phone. He said, "Meet me tomorrow, but not at my office." He gave an address to a coffee shop 2 towns over. Said to bring anything I had left. Originals, copies, even scraps. I hung up and stared at the note in my lap. For the first time in days, I felt something shift. Not relief, not hope, but clarity. Brendan hadn't just taken what was mine, he had tried to bury who I was. But Harold had left me a map, and I intended to follow it. By sunrise, I had stopped pretending. The night before, I had clung to hope like a brittle branch. Maybe Brendan had made a clerical error. Maybe he meant to protect me and just didn't explain it well. But when I walked into the kitchen and saw the envelope still sitting on the counter with his handwriting curling across it, something inside me broke clean. I sat with my tea untouched. My hands trembled, but not from age, from clarity. There was no mistake. Brendan had taken what was mine, not out of need or desperation. This was deliberate, cold, planned. I pulled out the drawer beside the sink and took stock of what had been happening these past few months. The coffees he brought over, the folders he asked me to glance at, the way he had always chosen days when I was half asleep from my medication or distracted by a phone call. He knew when I was off balance, and I had let him. The thought sickened me. I walked through the living room, each step heavier than the last. Every corner held Harold, the window frames he had carved, the bookshelf he insisted on building himself, even though it took him 4 weekends and a dozen splinters. These weren't just walls. This was my life. Our life. And Brendan had gutted it. A knock came soft and hesitant. Evelyn. I opened the door before she had the chance to knock again. She stood there with a container of cranberry scones, her eyes narrowing as they scanned my face. "You didn't sleep," she said, plainly stepping inside. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She followed me into the kitchen, placing the container on the counter. Her presence filled the silence without demanding it to break. That was something I had always loved about her. "You remember the old days?" I asked after a while, when Brendan used to beg Harold to let him hammer nails into the porch just to feel grown up. Evelyn smiled. He couldn't have been more than 7. Didn't even hold the hammer right. I nodded, then looked her in the eye. "He's not that boy anymore. He hasn't been for a long time." Her expression softened, but she said nothing. "He's taken it, Evelyn. All of it. The house, the money, even the car. And I signed it over, piece by piece. I expected pity, maybe disbelief. But Evelyn only stepped closer, placed a warm hand over mine and said, 'Then it's time to stop playing quiet.' That's when I told her about Harold's ledger. There's a name in it. Someone Harold trusted. Said if anything ever felt off, I should reach out." Evelyn leaned in. "Who Dennis Fairgrove? Harold's old colleague. Financial advisor, I think. I haven't spoken to him in over 20 years. Evelyn didn't hesitate. "Then you better find his number. Today." I felt like a student again, being given orders by a stern but loving teacher. I nodded. I spent the next 2 hours digging through old drawers, photo boxes, and Harold's files. Most of it smelled of dust and years gone by. But in a slim, leather-bound notebook tucked beneath tax receipts from the early 2000s, I found it. A business card, slightly bent at the corners. Dennis Fairgrove, CFP. Still had a phone number with a Pennsylvania area code. My fingers hovered over the landline. I picked up the receiver, heart pounding like it hadn't in years, and dialed. He answered on the 4th ring. "Fairgrove here." "Dennis," I said. "This is Marjorie. Marjorie Lindell, Harold's wife." A pause. Then warmth, "Marjorie." "My goodness, it's been ages. I'm so sorry to hear about Harold. He was one of the best men I ever knew." I swallowed hard. "Dennis, I need your help. Privately, I believe something is very wrong. His tone changed, softened. Do you want to come in? Or should I come to you somewhere neutral? Quiet. We agreed to meet the next day, a small diner on the edge of town. When I hung up, Evelyn looked at me with cautious relief. You don't look scared anymore, she said. I'm not, I whispered. Not because I know what I'm doing, but because I'm done, not knowing. That night I didn't sleep much either, but I wasn't tossing and turning from fear. I was writing, dates, memories, each time Brendan visited, what he handed me, what I signed, every scrap I could recall. My memory may not be what it once was, but pain has a way of sharpening the details. I tucked those notes into my purse beside Harold's card and Dennis's number. I stood by the window watching the streetlights flicker. Somewhere out there, my son was sleeping peacefully in a home that used to be mine. But tomorrow I would begin pulling back the curtains, not for revenge, for truth. The diner sat at the edge of Route 202, where the town thinned out and the cornfields began. It hadn't changed much since I'd last passed through with Harold. Same cracked parking lot, same flickering neon sign. I arrived early and chose a booth farthest from the windows. Dennis walked in 15 minutes later. His grey blazer looked slept in, and he moved slower than I remembered. But his eyes were sharp. He spotted me right away, nodded once, and slid into the seat across from mine. We didn't waste time on small talk. I pulled out the manila envelope from my purse. Inside were the notes I'd written, copies of recent statements, and a scan of the envelope Brendan had left on the counter. I laid them out quietly. He sifted through them with calm, methodical hands. As he read, I studied him. He still had the same habit of tapping his index finger against his thumb when he was thinking, just like Harold used to say. Finally, he looked up. This was no accident, he said. These documents were signed under the authority of a general power of attorney. Did you ever sign one? I hesitated. I remembered the papers. Brendan had told me they were to make it easier for him to help with errands or banking if I ever needed a hand. He had caught me at my most distracted. After Harold's memorial, the house had been full of casseroles and condolences, and I had been too tired to read fine print. I think I did, I admitted, but I thought it was temporary. I never expected him to use it to take everything. Dennis nodded grimly. That kind of authority can be used properly or it can be weaponized. In this case, I suspect it's the latter. And if there's any coercion or manipulation involved, we may have grounds to challenge it. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a yellow legal pad. First, we need to confirm a few things. Is the house still in your name? Any changes to the title? I shook my head. I didn't know. All right, he said. We'll check property records. As for the bank accounts, I can help you request a copy of all activity for the past 6 months. I felt the weight of it then, the scale. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was paperwork, deadlines, burdens I didn't know how to lift alone. Then I remembered Harold's notebook. I reached back into my purse and pulled it out. The pages were lined and weathered with his handwriting in faded black ink. Dennis took it gently, scanning the entries. Near the middle, one name was underlined in bold Dennis Fairgrove, and beneath it, a note in Harold's script. If anything ever seems off call, Dennis. Trust him. Dennis swallowed. I forgot about this. He never told me he wrote this down. I managed a small smile. He knew you'd still be around. We sat in silence a moment longer. The waitress brought coffee. I didn't touch mine. There's one more thing, Dennis said. I remember Harold mentioned a will, not the final one, but a draft. He was very careful about making sure nothing could be altered without outside confirmation. Did you ever see it? I shook my head again. If he had one, it wasn't filed with the attorney we used when we moved here. Dennis tapped his pen. If Brendan acted against Harold's original intentions, and we can prove it, that would change everything. I sat back. A strange calm came over me. I had spent so long swimming in confusion. Now I had direction. I need you to be discreet, I said. Brendan cannot know we've spoken. You have my word. Dennis replied. I've handled cases like this before. Quietly. Carefully. Before we parted, he handed me a slip of paper with a name and number. Ainsley Tran, he said. She's a trust and estate attorney, one of the sharpest in the state. If we need to escalate this, she'll be the one to call. As I drove home, I kept replaying Harold's voice in my head, that soft, even tone he used when he believed in something. He had trusted Dennis. He had left me a map in his own way. I hadn't been completely alone. Back at the house, Evelyn was pruning her rose bushes. She looked up as I pulled into the driveway. Well, she called out. Did you find what you needed? I stepped out, clutching Harold's notebook like a lifeline. Yes, I said, and maybe a little more than that. She followed me inside, and I filled her in on everything. Dennis, the power of attorney, the missing will. She listened without interruption, her face hardening with each detail. You were groomed, she said when I finished. Plain and simple. He came here week after week wearing down your guard. I nodded. I knew it now. That night after Evelyn left, I opened every drawer Harold had ever used. I sorted through files, receipts, old tax returns. I traced every inch of the past 15 years in paper. Around midnight, I found a flash drive taped beneath the false bottom of his toolbox. The label was handwritten. Lindell Legacy. I stared at it for a long time. Tomorrow I would plug it in. But tonight I let myself cry. Not out of weakness, out of clarity. Because now, for the first time since Brendan's call, I wasn't lost. I had found the thread, and I intended to follow it. Every inch, every knot, until the truth was laid bare. The next morning I left the house before 7. Evelyn had offered to drive me, but I needed to do this part alone. I wore the grey wool coat Harold once gave me, and tucked Dennis's card into my purse, along with the notes I'd written in the night. The wind was sharp, but I barely noticed. My mind was fixed on the quiet booth in the diner where I was about to sit across from someone who once called my husband a brother. Dennis was already there, seated in the corner. He stood when I approached and gave me a quick, polite hug. Age had bent his shoulders slightly, but his eyes were still sharp behind the glasses. We ordered coffee. No small talk. I pulled out the envelope of documents I had found and handed them across the table. He took his time reading in silence. When he finally looked up, his expression had changed. Less surprise, more concern. You didn't sign this willingly, did you? I shook my head, not knowing what I was signing, no. He tapped the paper with his pen. This isn't just a transfer of property. This is a general power of attorney. Whoever holds this controls everything. Your assets, your medical decisions, even your ability to contest anything. And right now, that's your son. I gripped the edge of the table, steadying myself. Then it's real. Dennis nodded slowly. But that doesn't mean it's legal. If your signature was obtained under false pretenses, especially without independent counsel, we have room to challenge it. He leaned forward. Did Brendan ever ask you to sign anything with someone else present, like a notary or third party? Only him. Just him. He always said it was routine paperwork. He'd bring coffee, distract me, talk about the weather. It was always casual. Dennis made a note. Classic bait and berry. He gives you comfort on the surface, so your guard drops. It's manipulative. And if we can prove that pattern, we can argue undue influence. My stomach turned at the phrase. Undue influence. It sounded clinical, but that's exactly what it was. He continued. I'll need copies of everything you can find. Any paperwork you suspect he gave you, even if you think it's meaningless. He may have embedded authorizations in benign-looking forms. I'll gather what I have. There's more at home. He paused. One more thing. Brendan didn't do this alone. These forms were drafted by someone who knew exactly how to structure them. Legal knowledge, possibly even bar credentials. His name is Corey, Brendan's friend since college. He works at a small firm in town. Dennis's face hardened. That fits. I've seen his firm's name on other shady arrangements. We'll need to tread carefully. If Corey's involved, he'll have covered his tracks. He tapped the envelope again. But everyone leaves something behind. That sentence hung in the air between us. I thought of Harold's boxes of the USB drives, the notebooks. I didn't know what might be there, but I knew I had to start looking harder. Dennis leaned back and sipped his coffee. I'm going to loop in someone. A lawyer, I trust. Ainsley Tran. She specializes in elder law and cases like this. Quiet, efficient, and good under pressure. I didn't protest. If anything, I felt relief. We need to move quietly. Brendan probably doesn't think you've figured it out yet. That's to your advantage. The moment he suspects you're digging, he'll start covering his steps or worse, retaliate. Dennis's voice was calm, but it landed like a bell. I had stepped into something deeper than I imagined. This wasn't just about betrayal. This was a game of timing and control. What should I do next? Go home. Start a file. Put everything in one place. Make a list of every time Brendan visited what you signed who was present. Include the times he mentioned Corey. Anything and everything. I nodded. My fingers wrapped tightly around my mug, grounding me. We'll meet again in 2 days, Dennis said. Ainsley will join us then. Don't mention this to anyone. Not even Evelyn for now. The fewer people who know, the safer it is. He walked me to my car. As I opened the door, he added one last thing. This isn't your fault. People don't expect to be betrayed by their children. That's what makes it so cruel. I drove home in silence. The road blurred in the corners of my eyes, not from tears, but from a kind of disbelief that had calcified into resolve. Back in my kitchen, I spread out Harold's folders. I flipped through every document, every post-it, every tax return. I dug through drawers, lifted the floorboards beneath the upstairs closet, checked inside the antique coffee tin where Harold used to stash his fishing permits. And there, near the back of his old desk drawer, I found a labeled envelope. USB, it read, in Harold's handwriting. I held it like it was fragile. Tomorrow I would see what was on it. And maybe, just maybe, the past would give me the one thing I needed to protect the future. A flaw in Brendan's plan. A piece of truth he didn't know I still had. The USB was heavier in my palm than it should have been. Not in weight, but in consequence. I didn't plug it in right away. I placed it beside my teacup and just sat there watching the steam curl up from the mug. The day was quiet. A still kind of quiet. No wind, no birdsong, just the soft creak of old wood as the house breathed around me. I finally stood up and walked to Harold's desk. His old laptop, dusty but still intact, sat in the bottom drawer. I hadn't touched it since the funeral. The charger was still wrapped in the same twine Harold had always used. I uncoiled it, plugged it in, and powered up the machine. It took longer than I remembered the screen flickering once before settling into life. I inserted the USB and held my breath. There were 3 folders, one titled Lindell Legacy, another named Legal Review, and a third labeled Final Letter. I clicked on the first one. Inside were scanned copies of Harold's original will drafts. They had been updated multiple times over the years. But what struck me most was the consistent language in every version. He had named me primary executor. Every asset, every account, even the car title was meant to remain in my name until I chose otherwise. Harold had made it airtight. The second folder, Legal Review, included email chains between Harold and a lawyer I didn't recognize, a woman named Kathleen Mora. They had discussed Brendan, not in cruel terms, but in cautious ones. There was a thread from 3 years ago. Harold had written, "If anything ever happens to me and Marjorie is unsure, please remind her of Clause 17. She has the right to reverse or contest any transfer initiated without legal counsel present." There it was, a clause I hadn't known existed, and a lawyer's name I could track down. I opened the last folder. Final letter. There was only one file. It was a video. My hands hovered over the mouse. Then I clicked. Harold appeared on screen, sitting in the very chair where I now sat. His face looked tired, more lined than I remembered, but his voice was steady. "If you're watching this, something has gone wrong. I don't know when. I don't know how. But Marjorie, listen to me. Brendan is not evil. But he's weak. And weakness makes people dangerous. I've seen signs. I hope I'm wrong. I truly do. But if he pressures you, if he comes to you alone with papers, if anything feels even slightly off, I need you to trust your gut." He paused, leaning forward. "I've put safeguards in place. The will, the clause, the lawyer. It's all here. And you're not alone. Dennis knows what to do. So does Evelyn, even if she doesn't realize it yet. You've always been stronger than you think, Marge. This house, this life, it was built by both of us. Don't let anyone tear it down in my name." I closed the laptop slowly. My chest ached in a way that wasn't grief, but something deeper. A sense of being seen even now. Harold had prepared for this moment, not because he didn't trust Brendan, but because he trusted me. The rest of the day passed in silence. I didn't tell Evelyn, not yet. I needed time to sit with what I had found. That night I called Dennis. "I have something. A USB. It has everything. The will drafts, a clause, even a video from Harold." His voice sharpened. "That's a game changer. Do not let it leave your sight. Can you bring it tomorrow morning?" "Yes, I'll be there." I barely slept, but I didn't feel tired, just focused, like something had clicked into place. At Dennis's office the next morning, he reviewed the files while Ainsley Tran sat beside him flipping through her own set of notes. She was younger than I expected, but her eyes didn't miss a thing. After 20 minutes, she looked up from the screen. "This clause, it's enforceable, especially with the video. That makes it nearly impossible for Brendan's version of the will or any transfers to hold up in court. And if Corey was involved in drafting illegal paperwork, this isn't just civil. It could become criminal." Dennis looked at me with quiet determination. "We're going to freeze everything. Accounts, titles, assets. We'll file a motion under emergency injunction. Quietly. No press. Not yet." And the USB Ainsley held it up. "This is the linchpin. With this, we control the narrative." They outlined the next steps: filing with the probate court, delivering notice to Corey's firm, submitting the original drafts and video under seal. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a new shoreline. Not land I'd ever wanted to reach, but one I now had to cross. When I left the office, I didn't drive straight home. I stopped by Harold's grave. The grass was trimmed, and someone had left a small bunch of daisies. Probably Evelyn. I stood there with my hand resting on the cool stone. "You were right," I said softly. "And I'm listening now." The breeze picked up, light and crisp. I walked back to my car with the weight in my chest slightly lighter than before. That night, for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to sleep. Not because everything was over, but because I knew what came next. And this time, I would be the one holding the pen. I arrived at Dennis's office just before 9. The autumn air carried that sharp edge that hinted winter wasn't far. I had the USB in my purse, nestled between my worn leather checkbook and the folded piece of paper where I had scribbled every odd thing Brendan had done these past months. Dennis opened the door before I knocked. His office smelled faintly of wood polish and old books. Ainsley was already inside, flipping through a folder so thick it looked like it had swallowed a phone book. We got started immediately. They had spent the night drafting paperwork. Ainsley explained the strategy with a calm intensity that reminded me of a surgeon reviewing an operation plan. First, we file an emergency motion to freeze all assets tied to your name. Bank accounts, the deed, the car. Then we present the original will drafts and Harold's video. That video alone makes this a different kind of case. Dennis nodded. Brendan would have to prove you were of sound mind when signing those papers. But with the evidence we have, we can argue the transfers were done under undue influence, possibly coercion. I listened quietly, my heart thudding. It wasn't just about proving Brendan lied. It was about reclaiming what Harold and I had built, and what Brendan had tried to erase in silence. Ainsley handed me a new set of forms. These are revocation documents. You're asserting your legal right to withdraw any power of attorney previously signed, especially those used without a neutral legal witness. I signed them without shaking. Dennis turned to Ainsley. We'll need to deliver these to Corey's office today. Quietly. She tapped her pen on the folder. I have someone who can courier it. He'll deliver it directly to Corey's assistant with a cover letter stating we're reviewing the transfers and request immediate suspension of any actions taken on Marjorie's behalf. And the banks. Dennis pointed to the folder in front of me. We'll file an affidavit with the banks based on the emergency clause Harold had noted. That clause triggers a secondary level of verification. They'll have to refreeze the accounts under internal fraud protocols, especially if we cite that the transfers were initiated without independent counsel. The language was sharp and legal, but underneath it, I heard what mattered most. I was getting my voice back. By noon, the courier had left. Ainsley and Dennis were on a conference call with a probate clerk in Harrisburg. I stood outside for a few minutes, leaning against the brick wall, staring up at the grey sky. I hadn't spoken to Brendan since the call he made on the night of his wedding. I didn't intend to speak to him until the truth had a name, a stamp, and a court seal. That afternoon we got word. The bank confirmed a temporary hold had been placed on all activity under the Lindell household accounts, pending documentation review. The title office flagged the deed transfer for further scrutiny due to new legal claims. The wheels were turning. Ainsley didn't smile. She just nodded like she had expected it all to work. I appreciated that. Now comes the careful part, she said. No announcements, no media. We let them feel secure. Let Brendan believe nothing is coming. That way he doesn't pivot, doesn't prepare. That's when people make mistakes. Dennis added, if we make this public too soon, it could backfire. Let's gather quietly and strike only when we have the full set of proof. At home, I found Evelyn waiting on my porch, a blanket over her shoulders. She stood when I parked, her face still and unreadable. You look different, she said once I reached the steps. I feel different. She followed me inside, sat across from me at the kitchen table. I told her everything. The USB, the lawyer, the clause, Harold's video. Her eyes didn't leave mine once. He always looked out for you, she said quietly. He did, and now you're doing the same. We didn't say much after that. She stayed long enough to drink half a cup of tea, then left without asking for anything. I knew she understood that words weren't needed that night. Before bed, I pulled out a blank notepad and began listing names. People Harold had once trusted, neighbours, old colleagues, anyone Brendan might have contacted behind my back. I wanted a timeline, a map of how this happened. I didn't want to miss anything again. By morning, Ainsley sent word. Corey's office had acknowledged receipt of the letter but made no comment. That was a good sign. It meant they were rattled. "We've got a small window," she said. "Brendan is planning a post-wedding celebration this weekend. Press will be there, local news. If he's hoping to make a name for himself, he'll want to play perfect son. So we use it." Dennis and Ainsley outlined a plan, a public filing timed to coincide with the event, a court representative hand-delivering the injunction, copies sent to the press only after it had been served. No theatrics, no dramatics, just precision. The next few days moved quickly. I signed affidavits, verified copies, gave statements under oath. My hands no longer shook. My voice didn't waver. The day before Brendan's event, Ainsley stopped by my house personally. She brought a printout of the injunction order now signed and sealed. Her face held a kind of quiet resolve. "This goes into motion tomorrow morning," she said. "Are you ready?" I looked at her, at the papers, at the steady certainty in her tone. "I am." That night, I sat alone in Harold's chair, the USB beside me, the house silent. I closed my eyes and pictured the moment Brendan would hear the news. Not out of spite, but because it would be the first time he would be held accountable, and I would not be the one watching from the shadows. Saturday morning unfolded with a sharp, cloudless chill. I stood at my window, hands wrapped around a mug of plain black tea, watching the last amber leaves skitter across the sidewalk. Brendan's post-wedding party was set to begin at noon. By design, it would be a display of wealth and charm, of new beginnings, dressed in expensive tailoring and curated smiles. I didn't plan to attend. That was never the point. At 10:30, I got a text from Ainsley. One word. Moving. I turned off my phone, tucked the printed copy of the injunction into the drawer beside Harold's old ledger, and changed into the grey wool jacket he gave me for our 35th anniversary. I pulled my hair back tight. No makeup, no jewellery. Just a quiet woman who had spent months being erased, now standing tall in her own house. Across town, guests began to arrive at the River Hall event pavilion. The parking lot filled with luxury cars. Cameramen positioned themselves near the entrance, waiting for the first glimpse of Brendan and his bride. It had all the ingredients of a perfect public relations moment. Local media had even teased the event as a profile in next-generation family leadership. At 11:45, a county process server stepped out of a silver sedan and walked directly into the lobby, holding a manila envelope marked with the seal of the state probate court. He asked for Brendan Lindell. Inside, Brendan was adjusting his tie in the mirror, unaware. The violinist had just begun tuning. A waiter passed with glasses of Prosecco. Everything was unfolding according to plan, until it wasn't. A staff member tapped Brendan's shoulder, whispered something. A moment later, the server handed him the envelope. Brendan smiled politely, then stepped into a corner, flipping it open. At first, his expression didn't change. Then his lips parted slightly. Then the colour drained from his face. According to Ainsley, he stood frozen for a solid 30 seconds. Then he whispered something to Corey, who had been standing nearby. Corey took the papers, flipped through the top few pages, and turned pale himself. His assistant made a call to their office. Within minutes, Brendan was seen leaving through the back. His tie loosened his steps, hurried. No speech, no toast, no thank you to the press, just silence and retreat. I didn't need a front row seat to any of it. Ainsley and Dennis kept me informed. The injunction had been granted in full. All assets Brendan had attempted to transfer were now frozen. The house, the accounts, the vehicles, even the deed re-registration. Corey's firm had been formally requested to submit original transfer documents for forensic analysis. The process was now in motion. Later that evening, Dennis stopped by my house. He brought a bottle of ginger ale and 2 crystal glasses that looked like they hadn't seen sunlight in a decade. "You might want to sit for this," he said as he poured. Turns out the document Corey filed had discrepancies. Pages were misnumbered, signatures mismatched in pressure and angle. Brendan had submitted a version of the transfer agreement that lacked proper witness verification. And the notary disbarred 6 years ago. Dennis grinned as he raised his glass. Sloppy work from someone trying to look like a professional. I sat back in Harold's chair, the USB now locked in a safety envelope in my file cabinet, and let it settle in. This wasn't over, but the tide had turned. Brendan wouldn't be able to undo what had been filed, not without raising more red flags. The spotlight was now on him, and Corey. I thought about the little boy who used to line up cereal boxes to make cities on the kitchen floor, the teenager who cried when Harold got sick, the man who once called me on a business trip just to hear me say goodnight. That version of him had long disappeared, and yet I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt grounded, like the earth beneath my feet had steadied after months of tilting sideways. That night I walked into the bedroom and opened the top drawer of Harold's nightstand. Inside was a scarf he had always kept folded for me, back when I used to get cold in the evenings. I wrapped it around my neck, looked in the mirror, and didn't see someone broken. I saw a woman who had been underestimated one too many times. I walked back to the living room and lit the fireplace, letting the silence of the house swell. I imagined Brendan back at his condo, staring at the letter from the court. I pictured Corey pacing, realizing this wasn't just about paperwork anymore. It was about credibility, about consequence. Sunday morning, the story broke in the regional news. Quietly, but it was there. Probate dispute halts. Transfer of longtime family estate in Allegheny County. Names weren't mentioned directly, but locals knew. Within hours, I received 2 emails from Harold's former colleagues. One simply said, "Good for you." The second one read, "Harold would be proud." I didn't reply to either. I didn't need to. Instead, I brewed a cup of tea, took my notes from the night Brendan first handed me the papers, and placed them in a new folder labeled Active. This wasn't the end. Not yet. But for the first time, I wasn't walking behind anyone. I was walking forward, on solid ground. The call came just after 7 in the morning. I hadn't even poured my coffee yet. The landline rang twice, then again, like it was thinking over whether to keep trying. I let it go to voicemail. I already knew who it was. I just didn't know what version of him I'd be hearing. Brendan's voice was quieter than I remembered. It had lost that firm confidence he usually wrapped around every word. He didn't say hello, just started talking. Said he didn't understand why I was doing all of this. Said I had misunderstood his intentions. Said I had embarrassed him. Then the part that made me lean against the counterphone pressed to my ear. He said he missed me. He didn't apologize. Not once. But he missed me. When the message ended, I didn't call back. Instead, I walked over to the window. The morning light was soft and clear. There was a single bird on the branch of the old maple tree chest, puffed, greeting the day, like nothing had shifted in the world overnight. I stood there until the kettle started to hiss. That afternoon, Evelyn came by with a bag of groceries. She said she was checking in, but I knew she could feel it. Something had shifted, not just in the court filings or Brendan's public image, but in me. She had seen me carry this burden quietly for so long. Now I was standing straighter, speaking more deliberately, breathing deeper. We sat in the kitchen while the soup warmed. I told her about the call, the tone in his voice, the way he had danced around remorse without ever stepping into it. She said what I already knew. Some people only come close to regret. They never land there. I nodded, stirring the pot steam rising like a veil between who I had been and who I was becoming. I spent the next few days closing doors Brendan had left cracked open. I called the utility companies, the insurance agent, the title office. I corrected every record that had been altered or misfiled under his name. Every call made my hand shake a little less. Dennis helped me review the remaining accounts. There were still things to secure, documents to validate, but the bulk of it was done. The assets were no longer drifting in legal limbo. They were where they belonged. With me. Late Thursday evening, I sat down at my desk, pulled out the manila folder marked Legacy, and opened it beside Harold's old leather-bound planner. His handwriting still made my throat tighten. Neat, upright, full of quiet intent. Inside the folder was a single sheet I had been avoiding, the previous version of my will. It had been updated once after Harold passed, mostly to reflect the new structure of our accounts. Back then, I had left everything to Brendan. No conditions, no second thoughts. I stared at the signature on the bottom, then slid it aside. I began drafting a new version. This time, Brendan's name didn't appear. Instead, I listed a non-profit organization Dennis had introduced me to, one that offered technical training programs for women over 60. Women who had spent their lives raising children or supporting others, now finally given the tools to support themselves. Welding, auto maintenance, coding, electrical work. The kind of skills Harold had once believed everyone should have access to, no matter their age. I wrote in a clause about establishing a scholarship fund in his name, the Harold Lindell Women in Trades Initiative. I smiled as I wrote it. Harold would have rolled his eyes at the formality, then secretly loved it. I listed Evelyn as the point of contact for all correspondence. She had earned that trust tenfold. I made sure Ainsley had access to every legal backup, every file, every recording Dennis had logged, and I signed it. Just like that, the paper Brendan had chased for years no longer existed. That night, I slept for 7 straight hours. I hadn't done that in months. The following day, Ainsley called to confirm the court had formally accepted the freeze on all assets related to the dispute. Brendan's appeal had been delayed. Corey had quietly stepped back from representing him. Rumors were circling, but no new action had been filed. It wasn't over, but it was quiet. And in that quiet, I found something I didn't expect. Relief. Not joy. Not revenge. Just relief. I stepped out to the porch with a fresh cup of tea. The wind had softened. The air smelled like pine and old stone. I sat in Harold's old chair, let the sun warm my knees, and watched the street remain still. The phone stayed silent that day. Brendan didn't call again, and I didn't wait for him to. There are things you can forgive, and there are things you simply let go of, so they no longer sit on your chest each morning. This wasn't punishment. It was closure, and for the first time in a long time, I understood the difference. The office was quiet when I arrived. Just the soft hum of a printer behind a closed door and the faint ticking of the wall clock above the bookshelf. Ainsley stood to greet me, her usual calm, now paired with a certain reverence. She didn't smile this time. She simply offered me a chair across from hers and waited while I settled. The folder sat between us, my name written in blue ink across the tab. Clean. Official. She placed her hand gently over it. Today we finalize the language, she said. I nodded. No flourish, no long monologue. We both knew what this was. Not revenge, not bitterness, just a decision, one made with open eyes. She opened the folder and walked me through the structure. The trust fund, the tax protections, the operational outline of the scholarship program. Everything as we had discussed. It would be called the Harold Lindell Women in Trades Scholarship. Each year, it would fund tuition, tools, and transportation for women over 60 enrolling in certified vocational programs. No essays required, no proof of hardship, just proof of commitment. I listened as Ainsley laid out the safeguards, the trustees, the contingency plan, the clause that prevented anyone in my bloodline from ever contesting the fund. My signature would not only seal the trust, it would also replace every previous version of my will. Brendan's name would not appear, not as a beneficiary, not as a legal representative, not even in a footnote. I held the pen without hesitation. When I finished, Ainsley quietly took the signed pages, clipped them into a binder, and stood. She crossed to the cabinet by the window and placed the file inside a fireproof safe. "That's it," she said. It didn't feel like the end. It felt like the start of something long overdue. Later that week, I stood in the back row of a small conference hall in Harrisburg, watching Ainsley present the fund to a gathering of non-profit directors and educators. I hadn't wanted to speak publicly. I had asked her to carry that part for me. She did. She spoke with clarity and poise, painting a picture not of loss or betrayal, but of legacy and reinvention. She said the fund honored a man who believed in self-sufficiency and a woman who chose to honor him by helping others rise when she herself had every reason to retreat. The room went quiet when she named the fund. Then the applause came slow but steady, like people understood what it had taken to create something so specific and bold. I stayed until the last cup of coffee was poured and the tables cleared. A woman with silver hair and calloused hands approached me as I was putting on my coat. She introduced herself softly and said she had taken a welding course at 48 and had dreamed of returning to school, but couldn't afford the fees. She didn't ask for anything. She just wanted to say thank you. I held her gaze and told her this wasn't a gift. It was a hand resting on the small of someone's back, steadying them as they took their next step. That night, I placed the conference program beside Harold's photograph on the mantel. His eyes looked as calm as ever. I imagined him in his old flannel shirt, nodding once, not needing to say a word. Brendan hadn't called since the day of the voicemail. No email, no letter, no apology. But that silence no longer carried weight. I hadn't cut him out to punish him. I had simply stepped back far enough to see him clearly, and then I chose peace over proximity. It wasn't an act of anger, it was an act of alignment, and I had never felt more certain. The sun had not yet broken through the morning haze when I pulled back the living room curtains. The light came slow and grey, painting the trees with a quiet kind of softness. I reached for the kettle and filled it with water, letting the familiar rhythm of morning guide my hands. The house, for the first time in months, felt like mine again. Not because I had reclaimed it on paper, but because the silence was no longer laced with fear. It was simply still, and that was enough. I steeped a cup of Earl Grey and placed it gently on the windowsill, then opened the front door to let in the breeze. Evelyn appeared minutes later, walking her small dog along the sidewalk. She paused when she saw me lifting a hand in greeting. I waved back and stepped outside barefoot, letting the cold brick steps press into my feet. She walked over the leash, slack in her hand, and smiled. "You look rested," she said. "I do," I told her. She handed me a small envelope. Someone from the neighborhood association had left it in her mailbox, thinking it was mine. I opened it slowly, expecting another request for a donation or community meeting. But it was from the Harrisburg Women's Vocational Initiative. A thank you note signed by 3 women who had received the inaugural Harold Lindell grant. Each line was handwritten. Each voice held a different dream. One wanted to become a licensed electrician, another a metal worker. The third had been accepted into a cabinetry program she'd waited years to afford. They didn't know what had brought the fund into existence, but they knew it mattered. I stood there on the porch, the note trembling slightly in my fingers, and for a moment I could feel Harold beside me. Not as memory or grief, but as steady presence. The way he used to stand behind me at the sink, resting one hand lightly on my back. The future had reshaped itself, not cleanly, not without loss, but with purpose. Later that afternoon, I logged into my email for the first time in a week. There were a few newsletters, a spam message or two, and one unread message from Brendan. No subject line. I clicked it. It was short. No apology, just a single sentence. So this is how it ends then. You don't even answer. I stared at it for a long time. My hand hovered over the keyboard, but no words came. There was nothing left to explain. I printed the email, folded it once, and tucked it into the back of Harold's old ledger. That was where I kept the pages that taught me what silence can reveal. Then I closed the book. That night I went to bed early, the kind of early that isn't escape, but restoration. No voices in the hallway, no footsteps of betrayal, just my breath, the wind beyond the glass, and a world that had opened again, not because I forced it to, but because I finally stepped aside from what had tried to close it. And I slept without fear, because I no longer lived as the gatekeeper of a house that belonged to someone else. I was the owner, and I chose who walked through the door. If this story reminded you of a moment when you had to reclaim your peace, your voice, or your worth, know that you're not alone. There are so many Marjories among us, quiet but strong, who are finally choosing peace over proximity. If you found this story meaningful, feel free to share it or leave a message. Your voice might be the one another woman needs to hear today.